partners, and so we'll continue to collaborate with other countries.
There's more unfolding tonight as John Mahama proceeds to make some more pronouncements on this in Europe. His health minister, Kwabena Kando, has been holding talks with the U.S. delegation here in Accra over the crisis.
They've given us 90 days. Let's pray that it will not go beyond the 90 days, but we pray that God touches their heart to rescind their decision.
And if God does not touch their heart to do so?
Well, we will continue to remain a sovereign country, so no cause of alarm.
And top story, as always, is brought to you by Telecel, connecting energies and holy insecticide spray and enjoy a holy sleep. I am Blessed Sogah, and tonight President John Mahama is talking tough, calling out US President Donald Trump for carrying out what he terms a disruptive cut in foreign assistance to developing countries, including Ghana. Before his departure to Europe for the Munich International Security Conference, which is underway in Germany, the president directed his finance minister, Dr. Kasiela Tuforsen, to find measures and to take urgent steps in bridging the gap arising out of the suspension on the United States foreign aid and international funding program. Till date, government is yet to communicate clearly what its broad plans will be in plugging this funding gap, except for the health minister himself, Kwabena who is hoping and praying that the American people will not pull out the package, which has an element amounting to some 75 million United States dollars to the people of Ghana.
Yeah, I mean, this is a diplomatic engagement issue. So we'll be engaging them. We need them. We cannot say we don't need them. We need them. We'll be engaging them. They've given us 90 days. Let's pray that it will not go beyond the 90 days. But I don't think there's any of alarm for now, especially with the emergencies they were assisting. We have been able to put measures in place to maintain those activities on the field. For example, I'll give you one example. The distribution of, we call it the last milestone. So the distribution of, consumables and what have you, they assisted in some of the regions. So we have put measures in place to be able to continue those activities. And so there is no activity that will be put on hold. All the activities they were supporting will continue to operate until we pray that God touches their heart to rescind their decision.
And if God does not touch their heart to do so?
Well, we will continue to remain a sovereign country, so no cause of alarm.
Well, a sovereign country, he says we are, but true to his words, Kwabena Kando, indeed, a couple of hours ago, Joy News can confirm, has concluded some conversations with the United States Ambassador, Virginia Palmer, together with a delegation here in Accra, with pictures posted on social media indicating also the presence of some top Ghanaian and American officials holding some conversations, presumably over this crisis. We've been doing some checks on that. Parliamentary Affairs correspondent Kweku Asante joins me now with a bit of clarity on what's been happening in the last 24 hours. Kweku, let's dig into it because we can indeed confirm that the meeting happened today, correct, at the Ministry of Health?
Well, yes, the meeting did just happen, and the ministry obviously know what big a hole the USA AID cutting funds will actually cause to the ministry's budget in certain very critical and crucial aspects of the ministry's performance of its
and you look at the amount involved, for instance, over 75 million US dollars.
Yes.
That's no chicken change.
That's not at all. In fact, if you bring it to Ghana cedis, it's over $1 billion Ghana cedis. And the ministry do know how important that is. And so, despite the ministry taking a very tough stance in public, they recognize what a big deal this is, and they are trying and hoping and trying to convince the U.S. government that ultimately, if there's any way they can restore funding for them, that is something they are very much looking for.
And in fact, the sound we just played was the same sector minister who held the conversations today, announcing to international partners at the WHO meeting held a couple of days here in Accra, where he was, of course, hoping and praying, his very words, praying that this 90-day pause on the U.S. aid funding will be restored.
Yes.
But the developments we know of internationally do not give us that hope, does
Exactly. In fact, U.S. President Donald Trump, together with his Doge, they are talking tough about these matters. In fact, there are those who even expect that right after the 90 days expire, perhaps there's going to be a permanent ban on this. And that is why Kwabena Minta Kando is doing his best to try and lobby and trying to see if there are any other funds that will come from any other source to plug this hole.
The last mile project, for instance, is one of the key and flagship projects that the minister talks about, and you go beyond that and you would even realize that the US aid appears to be doing a more up north,
Yes.
in even supporting rural communities.
Yes. And so if you look at, in fact, if you look at the budget line and
Right.
you look at the USAID funds that is coming into the country and the places they are going, they are so crucial. HIV, AIDS, a lot of the pro-poor policies that the governments have been implementing over the last few years have been bankrolled by the USAID. And that pause in funds, we know that John Dramani Mahama instructed his finance minister a couple of days ago
to look for
try
alternative.
and plug the holes. But we know that there is a budget has already been approved, the mini budget, that took into consideration the grant that would have come from the US government. And so,
In fact,
if you're going to plug that hole, it will perhaps mean
Yeah.
cutting certain expenditure
Or-
and other commitments that you may have done, or perhaps not going the role of funding that at all.
Interesting developments there, and we'll be hearing from the president shortly because he acknowledges the fact that he needs to present his own budget
Yes.
in just weeks away.
Exactly. In
the
fact,
first quarter of
the confirmation coming now that the Minister of
Parliament.
Finance, Dr. Kassel Atuforsen, will present the budget on the 11th of March. And so all these disruptions would have to be factored into the budget, especially for a government that has promised to cut a raft of new taxes that were imposed by the elsewhere government. If you're cutting that, that leaves you a hole to fill, and already you are getting more holes.
Kuku, before I let you go, how are MPs, especially those on the finance committee, reacting to this? Because this is the same government that says, look, COVID levy will be gone, the electronic transfer levy will be gone, and then the tax on betting
Yes.
would also be gone
So-
by the time the finance minister lays his budget.
Just this week, the former finance minister did actually address Parliament on these matters. Some of these some of these measures that the Trump administration have taken. According to Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam, they are going to have very huge issues with the budget with regards to some of these cuts. At the same time, a new government coming in place and promising to cut some of these taxes. For the NPP side, they believe that the government,
Yeah.
the new government, should come out to the Ghanaian public and explain to them
That
the
we cannot do
exigencies of
that.
the time and say that we cannot cut these taxes because of A, B, C, or D. Perhaps we'll do that in the next year or two, but for now, we need those revenue to fill some of these taxes.
Kwaku Asante, our parliamentary correspondent, giving us the latest on this. We know that whilst these engagements are happening at home, President John Mahama himself is far away in Europe, talking tough and also warning that the United States of America may lose its soft power over countries such as Ghana. John Mahama says America's disruptive decision to cut aid all of a sudden will push Ghana and other developing nations to turn to other countries for help. Listen.
Have elections, we don't present the budget until the new government takes over, and so we're supposed to present the budget in March, so it's possible for us to make provision to cover what the shortfall in U.S. assistance is going to be. I believe that it's adversity and opportunity. It must teach Africa to become more self-reliant. This goes to help the most vulnerable in our society. And so in making those adjustments, we must learn how to take care of our vulnerable and make sure that they're able to be included in the growth that is taking place. I think that the U.S. played a very critical role in the post-world order, and that post-world order has benefited the whole globe, including the U.S. The U.S. has prospered from the post-World War order, but it's gotten to a stage where it wants to recalibrate, and it has a right to recalibrate. but I believe that the recalibration should be in a less disruptive manner than it is happening now. One of the things that U.S. is going to lose is that soft power that it has wielded in the world. I mean, these are people who are grateful for the kind of assistance that they get. And so for U.S. to decide that, no, we don't want to have anything to do with it anymore, then they lose some of that soft power. But it means that there are many other partners. U.S. are not our only partners, and so we'll continue to collaborate with other countries. And that's why we have a multipolar world. We are no longer a unipolar world. And so as bridges are burning, new bridges are being formed. And we need to look for those new bridges and be able to link the world on those new bridges. Like I said, U.S. is very well admired in a lot of the developing world, for the kind of assistance that it gives, for its presence in many theaters. And so if it decides that it's withdrawing, I think that there are many other countries that can fill the gap. But aside from filling the gap, I think that it sends a signal to Africa that the time has come for us to be more self-reliant when it comes to issues to do, especially with the vulnerable in our society. We should roll out more safety nets. We must go for more equitable societies, bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, and put out opportunities for our young people to be able to make a life for themselves.
And our text indeed on top stories revealing to us that the health minister, while John Mahama is away talking tough, has been engaging the United States ambassador, Virginia Palmer. And this very meeting is beginning to draw reactions even from Parliament and some MPs who are increasingly concerned about the situation. Joining us now is Professor Titus Bayo, who's MP for Lambusi and the NDC manifesto spokesperson on health, and a little later on we'll hear from Professor Godfred Bobquin, who's an economist and also professor at the University of Ghana Business School, joining us right about now, and Dr. Ishmael Hlonvo, who's an international relations expert. Dr. Hlonvo, I'll come to you shortly, but I just want to close the chapter on this meeting that we're hearing of between the health minister and the U.S. delegation by hearing from Professor Titus Bayo. Thank you, Prof, for your time. The point first of all about the engagements today. Yes, it is closed door, but we know the obvious reasons. Are we making headway, at least sustaining some lifeline from the American people?
Good evening to your listeners, and thank you for having me. I'm unable to discuss details of that engagement. I know that yes, it will happen, but I don't think I have the briefing to speak on it. With that change in policy, it is necessary to engage. So I'll commend the minister for having that engagement. And I know that government has taken the appropriate actions, and at the right time, a formal statement will come out to let the people know. Because these are proactive decisions. No one knew that suddenly this will happen. And if it's happening, we can't take on concern. So the Minister of Finance has been charged to look at how can to bridge that gap. It is necessary that the health minister also engages, because with this cut, there are a lot of things that are ongoing. What does it mean to the rest? So I think it is necessary, but it is premature to be able to give details of that meeting.
And of course, President John Mahama out there in Europe giving us a sense of what might happen. He said he's likely to turn to other partners, but we can't do away with the U.S. aid as of now, is it? That will be devastating to our sector. You agree? You've been very active in the space.
I mean, it's not doing away, but if the person is not willing to deal with you, what do you do? As a responsible government, you have to take the necessary steps. It's not as though we are opting not to deal with them, but they are saying they are cutting it. So we have to necessarily find a way out. Already, I know that measures have been put in place to ensure there's no disruption of services. And the major activities like the last mile is ongoing. There's no any. But how do we sustain this going forward? As you stated, the financial gap is huge. We cannot discount it. we can't say that it is something to just get rid of. But you must take deliberate steps to look at where can we mobilize resources internally and from other multilateral sources. Thankfully for us, the first government budget of this government is yet to be read. It will mean that we have to restructure. And the reason why the finance minister was instructed, because you would know, if you know how government budgeting is done, most of these budgeting projections would have been ready by now and finishing touches being put in place. Then all of a sudden this comes up. It means that people have to go back to the drawing board and see where can we make adjustments. And most of the interventions of USAID is to the most vulnerable of our society that we cannot leave out. So it means that we have to think outside the box. And I think that's exactly what government is doing.
A very tough time for the NDC government, isn't it? Because I bet you when you were drawing up the manifesto of the NDC, in fact, you were very instrumental in shaping up the health policies. Quite an ambitious policy you have there. Now's the time for some, as they're suggesting, that the NDC, it's humble pie and apologize to the people of Ghana that it cannot scrap the taxes that you've been, promising to scrap, such as the e-levy, the COVID-19 levy, the betting tax. This is the time to apologize, isn't it?
Well, I don't see where an apology comes in here or eating of the humble pie comes in. You've been hit by a tragedy that we didn't expect. In economics, we sometimes assume that all other factors being stable. This is not the situation. But if you look at the justification we had for scrapping these taxes, really, many of the justifications still hold. Why do we pay COVID levy when COVID is no more in existence? Betting tax and some of the draconian taxes we felt were not necessary. If it has become necessary that taxes are introduced to handle the situation, we will hear from the finance minister. But I have not picked that kind of inclination from government sources yet. But he's been asked to see how he can fill the gap. But I think that the Ghanaian must recognize the challenges that we have faced, some of which were not anticipated at all. So when we come out with solutions as a responsible government on how to handle this and to keep the government running and to keep essential services running, malaria, HIV, to be able to still combat these diseases, I am sure the Ghanaian population would understand the situation. And it's not you have done something, you are going back on it, that's why you're coming to apologize. We've met new challenges, and they must come up with new solutions. But whatever those solutions are, I'm sure the finance minister will lay them out. But taxes, the principle still stands. They don't introduce a levy for COVID. The disease is no more of public health importance, of international concern, and you maintain that levy without any explanation to the people of Ghana. That is fair. You don't introduce an e-levy when you say you are going cashless, you are going digital, you are going electronic transactions, and yet a tax is preventing people from accessing this platform. That is still not a very
I see. So your point is about the need for government to justify each, financial measure or fiscal measure it may bring or put in place if it includes levies. But that's where Professor Bob Quinn has an issue. He last week, this week actually, a couple of days ago, Prof, I recall you were speaking to us, asking John Mahama to find the alternatives, but not to burden the taxpayer the more. Now the reality is dawning on us. He's in Europe saying the alternative will perhaps be to work with other international partners. Now the health minister is also making some attempts to, Georgia with the US people. For you, can we avert an additional tax in the first quarter?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to our cherished listeners. I think that the only difficulty here right now is that it has been that sudden, and therefore the expenditure in advance of appropriation for the first quarter did not anticipate this. But for the preparation of the main budget, 2025 budget, and the main appropriation act for that matter, I think that this matter should not be overstretched. we should be able to adequately make provision for that without necessarily compromising our fiscal sustainability. And we should still be able to remove those nuisance taxes, draconian taxes, without necessarily burdening the fiscal outlook. And I have reasons why I hold this view. If you look at it's just that as a country we have taken a narrow view to this tax cut. If you look at the NPP the NDC manifesto, just as they spoke about this tax cut, they also provided sufficient tax measures that will increase our tax revenue, right? So it's not like they didn't think through this. And some of the measures that they mentioned in their manifesto are consistent with our own position about scaling up our tax revenue without burdening the faithful few. I'll give you a couple of examples. In the last 25 years, by our own analysis, right, and it's verifiable, Ghana has lost between 3 to 5% of its GDP annually to tax exemptions. Annually. Tax exemptions that most of them are not rationalized and all of that. Just a couple of weeks ago, Parliament was debating about granting exemptions to some companies under 1D1F. We are talking about millions of dollars. So we need to take another look at our exemption regime, and I think the NDC has spoken about that.
Yeah, but
we need
Prof,
to visit that.
Yeah,
we could make significant savings from that. The other thing to also look at is that aid in itself, look, if after 68 years of independence, basic health services to our own people, we have to rely on the U.S. and the rest of them. That is not acceptable. To the extent that this withdrawal has been sudden, I think that is fine. But we have a couple of weeks or so to adjust our budget and move forward. Look, this country is capable of cutting wasteful spending, and it will be more than enough to offset the tax cuts and this aid that are being withheld. That is not the only thing. Africa, I like the last part of President Mahama's statement, which you played on your network right now, that it is about time that Africa works together and push for self-reliance, which is possible. If you look at the total illicit flows out of Africa to these same developed countries, unreasonable contracts we have awarded to U.S. companies, European companies, and all of that, the favorable tax regime we have granted multinationals from these countries to the detriment of local businesses across the continent, our natural resources that we have failed to properly utilize for the good of our own people. Think about Ghana, the abuse of our precious minerals in the last couple of years under irresponsible mining, gold smuggling. That benefit just a tiny few, while the majority look on helplessly, and our natural environment and ecological sustainability being compromised. This is a wake-up call. If you ask me, this is a blessing in disguise. Let's turn these existential threat issues into existential opportunity. This is only out for us. We can seek help from other countries, but remember, that will not be there for sustainable years and all of that. I think that we should look within. A couple of days ago, we talked about how we are going to rationalize our independence celebration. Great. Let's also look at even government fleets, vehicles, food. We need all of them. These are many other things that we should be looking at. Improved tax compliance. Look, let me tell you, in 2017 and also in 2001, a similar tax nuisance or tax handles were eliminated. We, together with the additional tax measures the government introduced, tax revenue actually increased relative to the size of our economy, and benchmark that against even 2000 and then 2016. So these tax cuts are incentives. Look,
okay,
you could grow the digital economy, earn more profit from there,
I see.
Get more tax revenue. So let us not look at these tax cuts as losses. These are incentives to promote business, to promote consumption,
I see.
and overall GDP will pick up. That is the only way you can generate more tax revenue.
Right, and these are critical points you're raising. Even the aspects about African countries coming together to wean themselves off aid. But we've been saying that for years now. And Dr. Halonvo, that's why we're bringing you in, because you have the international relations background to tell us why that has failed to yield impact ever since the vision was laid out through the African Union. The president now talking top, saying the president of the US, Donald Trump, is carrying out a less disruptive aid cut. A reason for which he says, well, if it's not going to happen, we'll turn to other countries or international partners. That doesn't sound like weaning ourselves off aid, is it?
Good evening to you and good evening to your listeners. Of course, for a very long time, we have not been able to match our talk with our action. We continue to talk about being self-reliant, yet the actions we continue to take suggest that we are so comfortable depending on other countries to take care of us. And since we have constructed structures and processes that enforce this position, development like this will continue to hit us hard. And when you hear the president talk, it seems that the immediate action that he has is to try to find out if there are other nations that will help pushing us before thinking of the long-term solution. Of course, at the concluding part of his speech, he made mention of the fact that we have to be self-reliant. Self-reliance has been more of a slogan than reality. Now, if you want to be self-reliant, you must begin to look at how you negotiate deals with multinationals. You must begin to grow up local champions. You must invest in local companies that will grow over time and compete with other companies in the world. We have not been able to put in structures that allow our own local companies to become very competitive. On the contrary, we have economic path that is detrimental to our local companies. You keep on granting very huge tax relief to multinationals, where from the day a Ghanaian try to start up the business, you continue to tax him. So we have disadvantaged our own companies, we have disadvantaged Ghanaian entrepreneurs, and therefore, and the state itself has not been able to come out with a model of leading development. So you don't just speak about being self-reliant, you must act self-reliant, which is lacking from the African leaders.
Interesting perspectives there. But as we wrap up, a minute each to all of you as to the way forward, because the budget, the first quarter of John Mahama's own budget, the budget is responsible for, will be laid out in Parliament in the next few weeks. Professor Bayo, for you, what are we to expect? Of course, you have some insight and insights to what's happening.
So I think the first thing I want to tell Ghanaians is that this government will make sure that the essential services that the disruption in the US aid funding may have caused will be sustained. We will make sure that those services are maintained. The government is going to let people with malaria, HIV, AIDS, and all those people suffer because of this. And so all actors in the government field are working to make sure that that's done. The only other thing I want to say is that this affords us an opportunity to look internally to make sure that the austerity measures His Excellency is putting in place are effectively completed, generating enough fiscal space to ensure that essential services are maintained. Before this announcement, His Excellency has already cut the size of his government to not more than 60 ministers and deputies. He has issued a directive on non-essential travels, asking all politicians or government appointees not to travel on very expensive tickets, and all this will be properly and effectively implemented to make sure that essential services are sustained. So no one should panic because of what has happened. But while we are looking externally, this is also a testament that the Ghana Beyond Aid mantra was only what it is, a mantra. Nothing really happened. If not, we should not be panicking at this moment. But we are in a where I can assure the people of Ghana that government will act responsibly, not to burden the Ghanaian with draconian taxes, but also ensure that essential services are sustained.
And for you, Professor Bokpin?
Well, thank you very much. You know what? Just a year ago, we didn't know where to hide because we had promulgated anti-LGBTQ bill. And the concern was that if we sign that bill, we're going to lose aid. Here we are. It's gone. You see the reality? The best helping hand we can find is at the end of our own arm. Let's block leakages in our revenue envelope. Let's explore efficiency in our public investment management process. Let's make sure that our natural resources are harnessed effectively and efficiently for the benefit of Ghanaians. This is the only way out. I think that if you look at the trend in the last 2 decades or so, you could not plan with aid. And it is sad that for Ghana, when it comes to essential services, remember, it's not just any kind of service. Essential services in health, education, and water, we have to rely on foreign aid and all of that. I think it just reveals how insensitive we have been to the vulnerable because we don't care. And it has to take taxpayers of another country to be taking care of the most vulnerable in our society. It tells us of the inequality we have presided over. It's a country for the strong and not for the weak. It's a country where those who survive are those who can steal. If you can't, you lose out.
Grateful. Dr. Ishmael Hlonvo, I'll give you the last word on this.
So, what should happen? I think that the Minister of Foreign Affairs, or even at the level of the presidency, should try to engage the U.S. If you consider the freeze, there are some loopholes in it, in as much as life-saving programs are concerned. And we must have a position to be able to negotiate with the U.S. in the short term to see if they can grant us some relief. Beyond that, we must avoid public statement that seems to be very antagonistic to the U.S. administration, in as much as we also engage other partners to see how they can help us. And of course, we must stop paying lip service to being self-reliant, put in the structures that empower local companies over time, have a coherent plan to develop this nation. A coherent plan means that your educational system, your industries are all moving at the same direction, so that you don't have an educational system that is producing graduates that do not fit the development agenda of the nation. So this is the way forward.
Right. And I'm grateful to you, gentlemen, for joining us. Professor Titus Bayo, MP for Lambuzi, and also NDC Manifesto spokesperson on health. To you, Dr. Ishmael Hlonvo, international relations expert, and Professor Godfrey Bokpin of the University of Ghana Business School. This is not the end of the conversation because there's a lot more coming up on this on Ghana Connect tonight with Kukwa Sante, who has been digging and also bringing in some different perspectives which will unfold in the next few minutes. Kweku, what are we to expect then?
So yeah, Blessed, this is a country that is struggling to fill a gap of 170 million, 150 million. But there are those who say that there's a lot of money here locally, because if you look at in terms of the money that is here, last week the data came out of the entitlement of the SIC boss, and that's the SIC. Imagine GMPC, imagine COCOBOD. We pay them huge dollars as per DMs when they travel. In fact, the SIC boss getting more than 100 liters of petrol every month or so. It's such a big conversation.
So you feel that while the US is cutting waste,
yes,
we must also cut
we
the
must
waste.
We must begin to cut some of the waste here. There's also a big conversation about wage inequality in the country. You have teachers, nurses, doctors who do so well, who are getting 2,000, 3,000 cedis a month. And then there are people who are leading state-owned companies that are not even breaking even, that are getting 80,000 Ghana cedis a month. And
so the argument, I believe, is that we must begin to look internal.
Exactly.
But we've also been asking the question, where will John Mahama look to, if not the US? Because that's a critical question, right? Isaac Kofi of our data analysis desk has been looking at that. And as we move into Ghana Connect, don't forget that we also have news filed this weekend. A lot of these issues will be looked at. They'll be looking at the OSP issue. Oral is on the agenda, which forms part of cutting this waste. Kweku, I believe that you're talking about. But let's listen to where possibly we can be looking at, if it's not the US, should it be China or even Germany, where John Mahama has been speaking from?
Well, Blessed, US aid has been paused, and in fact, Ghana will be looking at different options and in terms of alternatives. And we have looked at the data, and Germany could be one of the destinations. And why is it so? Because Germany, for instance, considers Ghana as a priority country for development, aid. And in fact, if you look at the data, you know that they actually emphasize usually on sustainable economic development, poverty reduction, good governance, renewable energy, and energy efficiency itself. Now, per the checks we've done between 1957 and 2020, what we've seen is that Germany actually provided Ghana roughly, some 1.6 billion euros in development, aid to Ghana, and this is